Picture yourself in a market in Dakar. You hand over a few crisp bills for a bag of oranges. That simple transaction connects you to one of Africa's most complex economic stories. The currency? The CFA franc, a system that spans 14 countries across Africa and touches over 160 million lives. But what is this currency, and how does it bind these nations together? Today, we're telling the story of the CFA franc, its history, its mechanics, and the crossroads it faces today. The CFA franc was created in 1945, as France worked to stabilize its African colonies after World War II. The goal was simple: facilitate trade and ensure monetary stability across French overseas territories. When independence swept across Africa in the 1960s, these newly independent nations chose to keep the CFA franc. For them, monetary stability was seen as essential for development in an uncertain post-colonial world. This decision led to the formation of two monetary unions. In West Africa, 8 countries: Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo, formed the West African Economic and Monetary Union. In Central Africa, 6 countries: Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Chad, Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon, created the Central African Economic and Monetary Community. Each union established its own central bank, but both continued using the CFA franc system. The CFA franc operates through a system that ties these African economies directly to Europe. The CFA franc is pegged to the euro at a fixed rate, meaning its value doesn't fluctuate wildly and provides a stable currency for trade and investment across member countries. When France adopted the euro in 1999, the CFA franc's peg was transferred from the French franc to the euro. This created an unusual situation. Monetary policy that affects the CFA franc is shaped primarily by the Eurozone Central Bank, the European Central Bank, ECB. Economic decisions by the ECB directly impact the value and stability of the CFA franc, even though the West African member countries do not have representation in Eurozone policy-making bodies. But this arrangement has deeper roots. Historically, member states were required to deposit half their foreign reserves with the French treasury. In return, France guaranteed full convertibility of the CFA franc into euros, a crucial safety net for regional economies. France also maintained seats on the boards of regional central banks, a colonial legacy that was contentious. Recent reforms have begun phasing out some arrangements, particularly in West Africa, though France continues backing the currency's convertibility. Supporters, including some economists and policymakers, often highlight the system's success in maintaining low inflation. For most of the past 20 years, inflation in both the West African Economic and Monetary Union and the Central African Economic and Monetary Community has stayed within the 1 to 3% target range, with both unions benefiting from the monetary stability provided by the euro peg. The recent spike to 7.4% in 2022 in West Africa, driven by food price shocks and supply disruptions, was an exception, with rates declining back toward target levels by 2023. Similarly, Central Africa saw inflation decrease from 6.3% in December 2022 to 4.8% by September 2023. But the CFA franc is not without controversy. Togolese economist Kako Nubukpo, a former official at the Central Bank of West African States, was a vocal critic. He argued that the fixed peg to the euro makes it difficult for countries to respond to local economic shocks. As he told Jeune Afrique in an interview in 2019, the CFA franc is a currency that hasn't evolved with the needs of our economies. It's time for Africans to decide their own monetary future. Senegalese economist Ndongo Samba Sylla wrote for the West Africa think tank, WAFI, echoing this sentiment, stating that the system, it limits monetary sovereignty and prevents policies adapted to African realities. There has also been long-standing debates about the requirement for member states to deposit a significant portion of their foreign reserves with the French treasury. Critics argue that having billions held in Paris deprives CFA franc countries of funds that could be used for development at home. Reforms announced in 2019 and implemented starting in 2020 phased out this requirement for the 8 West African countries, addressing one of the critics' main concerns. However, the 6 Central African countries continue to deposit reserves with the French treasury. Yet, others point out that the CFA franc stability has helped attract foreign investment and kept inflation in check. In a continent where currency volatility can devastate economies, This stability is seen by many as a vital asset. By 2019, the calls for reform could no longer be ignored. That December, after years of mounting pressure, West African leaders and France announced sweeping reforms. France would withdraw from central bank boards. The requirement to keep reserves in Paris would end for West African Economic and Monetary Union members, and the currency would be renamed the ECO. But implementation has proven difficult. The ECO has yet to launch, with its introduction repeatedly delayed by complex political and economic hurdles. Meanwhile, Central Africa's currency bloc has not adopted these reforms at all. The political landscape has shifted dramatically since then. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have begun distancing themselves from France, announcing plans to create their own joint currency. Yet the CFA franc remains in use while these new arrangements are still being developed. Across West and Central Africa, the debate over monetary sovereignty has become much more visible. Political changes, especially in the Sahel, have fueled demands for monetary independence, highlighting how currency reform is now deeply connected to ambitions for self-determination and stronger regional cooperation. The CFA franc's next chapter. The CFA franc is more than just a currency. It's a legacy of an empire, a tool for cooperation, and a symbol of unresolved questions about sovereignty. The next chapter for the CFA franc will be written through policy decisions, regional cooperation, and the voices of those most affected by its legacy. As CFA franc countries reimagines its economic future, the story of the CFA franc is far from over. For more analysis and news across the continent, subscribe to the Africa Briefing Room.